you miss me? I've been out of it comatose, but the depression is over.
Hello and welcome to Controlled Burns, the weekly Hobby List podcast from me, your host, Andrew Burns, or Slow Burn from Wildfire Gaming, with a very clogged up throat. I just got back from dinner at the old El Phoenix here in Greenville, Texas, and I am looking forward to getting into another great episode of Controlled Burns this evening. Now that my throat is clear. Thanks again for being here. We are going to be taking a little bit of a we're doing another kind of new list that is anticipation for something going on in the TV land that I'm kind of excited to talk about, and that is my Dreamcast for Survivor Season 50, which they're calling "In the Hands of the Fans." So if you were a Survivor fan, strap in. I think that you're gonna get a kick out of this episode, and I'm looking forward to getting into it. Before we go any further, just a reminder that Controlled Burns is a hobby list podcast that discusses all things pop culture. That's music, video games, TV and film, books, and everything under the sun that we do to entertain ourselves. So if you're interested in that and you enjoy what we do here, feel free to write into the show. At controlled burns with an es at gmail.com. We'll read any of your comments on the air. We've only gotten one write in so far, so feel free to be the second. And then, you can also share the podcast. You can like it and review it on any of the platforms where you may be listening to the podcast, whether that's Spotify, Apple Music, iHeartRadio, all the different platforms, YouTube, of course. So, with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about Survivor and my history with Survivor and kind of how I went about curating this list of my dream cast. It's sort of a moot point, obviously, because the Survivor season 50 cast has long been ensconced. We know who's going to be on the program. If you're into spoilers, which I'm definitely not, you probably even know how it's going to turn out. But uh, I still thought it was an interesting thought experiment to decide what I would have for the cast. I've done this on previous, obviously not on the podcast, but just privately, I've done it for various different seasons that have included returning players, going all the way back to All Stars, and you know, including Heroes vs. Villains and Game Changers. I think is a really interesting thought experiment. I definitely have a Game Changers list that I think would be interesting to discuss on the podcast at a later date. And other returning player seasons, the winners at war, of course. But it's been a long time since we have had a returning player season, all the way since Winners at War, which was, I don't know exactly how many years ago it was, probably about 5, given that they usually air these 2 per year. I definitely remember being excited for that season. But let's talk a little bit about my history with Survivor and how I was gonna go about curating this list. I was not somebody that was watching Survivor from the beginning, season 1 back in 1999 with Borneo. I was introduced to Survivor through season 19, which was Samoa and the antics of Russell Hantz. And so it was just a situation where the family was sort of flipping through channels, landed on Survivor, and I was just immediately extremely entertained and just drawn in and intrigued and interested in what he was doing. And I think it was the second episode, so I missed the pilot episode of season 19. But I was seeing kind of how he was sort of manipulating the people around him and just the social dynamics of it, the social psychology of it. I was just absolutely fascinated by what I was seeing. And so, very quickly, I immediately became a fan. I watched every week for the remainder of Samoa. And then, of course, they were going into Heroes versus Villains right after that. So then I was exposed to, what I would consider to be the greatest cast that of any Survivor season that we've ever seen. And of course, for me, I was introduced to all these characters, some of the all-time great characters on from Survivor, uh, firsthand. So I had not seen their seasons, of course. So I was kind of coming in cold, and that was amazing. And of course, I was loved that season as well, and it remains my favorite season to this day. We kind of went from there into some lower tier seasons, right? We went to season 21 Nicaragua, season 22 Redemption Island, season 23 South Pacific, season 24 One World, which is a really bad one. And so I kind of watched off and on during that time. I definitely watched Redemption Island because I was still invested in Russell Hanson, of course, Boston Rob. Kind of same similar situation for South Pacific. with Coach and Ozzy. But like 21 Nicaragua, I definitely didn't make it through at that time. And then One World, same thing. But I think after that, I kind of got into it where I was watching pretty religiously for the next long series of seasons into the 30s. But of course, during this time, I went back and watched the previous seasons, and it actually started with back at that time you could actually get a lot of the seasons through YouTube, and so my mom and I and my brother to some degree, like we would watch older seasons of Survivor. I bought us some of the DVD sets of some of the older seasons of Survivor, and that was really fun and experiencing those for the first time. And then I would also buy seasons on iTunes, which you could do at that time. You'd get digital copies of the season. So one way or another, I kind of over time watched all of the seasons that I had missed, and I have of course largely kept up with the show since then. The big gap, I guess you could say, is I after Winners at War, I did not continue where I did not keep up with the show, and a big part of that was this. That was around the time in 2021. That was when I met Reagan, and I wanted to introduce her to Survivor, and she got really into it, and so we decided to watch through all of the seasons in chronological order, which I'd never done before. It was a really interesting and fun experiment. But as a result, I fell behind on the 40s. And so I've been trying to catch up in preparation for season 50. I could clearly see as, we are exactly, I guess, 8 days away from the airing of season 50 as I record this on February 17th. I'm clearly not going to make it to uh, season 50 having seen all those episodes because I'm a little over halfway through season 47 right now. So I've seen all of 41 through 46. I will have probably seen all of 47 by the time next week rolls around, but I'm gonna lose out on 48 and 49. So I'm still planning on watching those in between episodes of season 50, but I'm gonna have some stuff spoiled for me because I understand that the winners of 48 and 49 are participating in season 50, which is a shame. But so when I'm curating this cast here, you have to keep in mind that it's really only taking into consideration the cast of season 1 through season 47. And hopefully there's some great characters in 48 and 49 as well, considering how many people they're bringing back from 48 and 49. But I'm not going to be able to factor those in. So this is specifically again 1 through 47. But I do have a pretty varied list of people that I have included. I've included, of course, 12 men and 12 women because that's what they did for the cast of season 50. And they go all the way back to season 1. And I have a pretty interesting lineup of people between then and now. And I included a few people from the 40s as well, despite how maligned they are in some segments of the community, which I can understand. But so I'm really excited to get into that here. So a little bit about my criteria. There wasn't like any specific criteria. I have a list that I maintain of my top 100 survivors of all time, and actually that goes back if you check out my website, thesoundtrackonline.com, which is one of the places where I share episodes of Controlled Burns. You'll find a very outdated list of the top 50 survivors of all time, which is interestingly by far the article that I have posted on the Soundtrack Online that has gotten the most traffic, and it's by a wide margin. So that's all. I've always thought that was kind of interesting. I'm gonna see if I can sign in here and get those statistics. So it's pretty interesting seeing the statistics. I don't actually look at the statistics of my website very often. I This is a website that I created almost 10 years ago. I created it around the time that I graduated from college, which was in 2016, to kind of keep because I was the editor of the East Texan at that time, which was my college newspaper, and I just wanted to kind of keep that outlet going, or the creative outlet, I mean to say. And just continued writing in between. I was going in to become a reporter, a journalist, and I wanted to keep my skills sharp. And so I created the website, and I've kept it going ever since. There have been long gaps in between posts at various times, but it's pretty active right now, just because I have controlled burns that I post there, and then obviously I have just did the top 100 greatest artists, which we've discussed at length on the podcast, alongside some other things. But yeah, I actually had 566 views on the website this week, which is apparently down. So I normally have even more than that, which is pretty interesting to see. I don't think I really imagined that I would have that level of success on this website. It's probably the most successful thing that I've ever created. But it's interesting. I have like in the last 7 days here, it says that that top 50 Survivor contestants of all time has 222 views, which is by far and away my number one article. Even though it was posted, let's see if I can figure out. It's posted in 2016, so obviously it's very old. But let's see if I can make it all time. Yeah, here we go. So my most viewed article of all time is still this top 50 Survivor season. Oh, actually, I'm wrong. Okay, so I misremembered that. So my top 50 Survivor contestants of all time is number four on this list. Has been viewed over 8,000 times. By far, my most viewed page is my review of the video game Limbo from 2010, which has gotten over 55 or almost 55,000 views, which is wild to think about. After that, it's my review of Super Mario Land from 1989 with 34,000, and my review of Donkey Kong Country from 1994 with 34,000. And then, like I said, the top 50 Survivor contestants of all time. And fifth place, by the way, is ranking all of Aerosmith's studio albums, which is also definitely outdated. A lot of stuff that goes back to the earlier days of my website, that's for sure. So very interesting. There's a little inside baseball for you in terms of the soundtrack online. But it's interesting that that is something that has it's kind of somewhat associated, I guess, if you're a hardcore fan, one of the few of the soundtrack online, that I had that list. So I have a actually updated top 100 Survivor contestants of all time, and so that was heavily influential on who I decided that I would put on this cast of men and women because generally, of course, I want to see some of my favorite players return. But I did take into consideration whether they played before, and whether they played recently as well. So, I think my favorite survivor of all time is Boston Rob. I'm one of those guys. And I did not include Boston Rob on the list because Boston Rob has come back quite a number of times, most recently at Winners at War. I don't know that I guess I might have included yeah, there's a at least one person from Winners at War that I did that I did include on this list, but it might literally only be one, because I wanted to kind of keep things fresh that were people that were not on the most recent returning players cast. So I kept that to a minimum, and then I prioritized players who have only played once or who played long ago. And so that's kind of the idea. So it's through the lens of my favorite players of all time. All of these players do appear on my top 100 players of all time, but it's not just a simple my top 12 men and my top 12 women, which is an interesting list in itself, and that's something that we if people are interested, that's something that maybe we can discuss. Certainly, at some point, I'll have to go through and update my top 50 survivors of all time. So we'll have that top 100 on the site at some point. But for now, that's kind of the criteria that I went with here. So as we get into the list here, I think the way that I'm going to do it is I'm just going to do trade off between the women and the men so that we don't have it weighted in any particular way. And I actually did rank them in terms of how much I would like to see them. So I will go from the bottom to the top, and at the top we'll have the people that I would like to see the most return. Part of what inspired me to do this, by the way, is just I've been really into Survivor right now, just because I've been watching, of course, a lot of Survivor trying to catch up, but also I've gone through some YouTube rabbit holes where I've enjoyed watching some channels like I It Out and Pridim and things like that, where they make fun lists about Survivor, and it just kind of made me think about this list and my favorite players of all time. And it's kind of, like I said, it's kind of the culmination the last 5 years of watching this show, sharing it with my wife Reagan, who I wanted to have on this episode and her to make her own list, but it ended up being kind of too stressful for her to try to make that list. And she also is lot busier than she used to be because she's just started a new job. So yeah, I've just decided that I would have to fly solo here. So I think that's pretty much all of the table setting we need to do here, and we will get into the list here momentarily. So number 12 for the women, we'll go to ladies first, is definitely one of the more under the radar survivors probably on the list, and that is Dina Bennett from Survivor Amazon season 6. So Dina was an interesting character on that season. First of all, I've always been a fan of Amazon. It's actually one of the it's definitely the original 10. I think it's the one that I saw last. For some reason, Amazon was one that I kind of skipped over whenever I was going back and watching through a lot of the seasons, and so um, it was one that I came to later, but I enjoyed it a lot. Obviously, Rob Cesternino is a big highlight of it, probably the biggest highlight of it, and I enjoy kind of his duo with Matt von der Velde and kind of the gimmickry going on there. I like the men versus the women aspect, and particularly through like a early 2000s lens. It's like a lot of stuff has aged very, very poorly, which is fun to go back to. But Dina kind of stood out for me in the women's tribe because she was very strategic for the standards of the time. She kind of had like this sharp sort of personality to her that I really got a kick out of, and I thought that it was particularly entertaining around all the other women where you kind of had some women that were there to sort of be eye candy, I think, to entice the men, which totally worked, but Dina was definitely not one of those. She was kind of trying to keep things together whenever it was still the women's tribe and just kind of be a voice of reason in there and keep things moving forward, and then she did well whenever things kind of uh, merged with the men, and she just had funny takeaways from being an older woman at that time, and kind of seeing how the younger men and women would interact. And so I really got a kick out of her. And she didn't go super deep in the game. What was she like I can't remember how far she made it. I think it looks like she made it 27 out of the 39 days. So she was on the jury. But she's never come back. To me, she was probably one of, if not the biggest snub from the original All Star season. I definitely would have liked to see her over someone like, you know, one of the Jennas or Sheehan or all. Sheehan ended up being great in All Stars, of course, but I just think that, or Alicia, or I just think that there should have been a spot for her, but she hasn't. Production didn't seem to be as taken with her as I was, but I was pleased to find that Reagan was a big fan of her as well, and so she's kind of been one of our favorites, and so I would like to see her return. One of the many on this list who we have never seen, other than on her original season. So she's my 12th draft pick, I guess you could say, for the women. For the men, my 12th draft pick is Jesse Lopez from Survivor 43. This is one of those where I was clearly very at odds with the way that they picked this season. I can't remember. I think if you do the math, maybe like four at most of these people that I have chosen are going to actually be on season 50. And a lot of that is there's obviously a extremely heavy bias toward people in the 40s, and there's just like they're just bringing back like half the cast just about from the 40s, which I think is very disappointing. A lot of people are definitely disappointed by that. But the thing about the people that they did choose from the 40s that kind of blows my mind even more is that I didn't really feel like they did a particularly good job of picking the 40s. I can go ahead and say I've picked four people from the 40s between the men and the women on this list, and only one of them is actually going to be brought back on the real season 50, and Jesse Lopez is not one of them. And to me that's baffling because he was definitely sort of the glue, I think, that was holding Survivor 43 together. He was definitely the most interesting character of Survivor 43. He had the most interesting relationship on Survivor 43 alongside Cody. And there was some very interesting social psychology going on between the two of them. I thought that, in those early 40s, I was really got sick of the whole sob story kind of approach to storytelling where, you find out about how hard someone's life has been and, why they're playing for $1 million. They definitely leaned really hard on that. And I guess they kind of realized that was kind of getting old because it seems like in the mid 40s and later 40s, they've kind of gone away from that, which I am thankful for. But Jesse Lopez, he actually did have a backstory that I was interested in. This idea that he was, kind of a gangbanger back in the day, and then he ended up going a different path and getting a college degree. And now he's a family man, and he doesn't have a lot of friends. He's kind of singular within his family, which is that aspect I can definitely relate with kind of the way that I interact with my family. So I really got a kick out of him. I thought that his strategy was excellent. It was really great to see it all sort of unfold, and I also think that he probably would have made it to the end and won if not for the stupid fire making challenge that everybody hates, which of course is not going to be, I believe, is not going to be a factor on season 50. So, I'm really surprised and shocked and disappointed that they did not include him on Survivor 50. I believe that he was one of the people that was under consideration for Survivor 50 that they ultimately cut, which is, I think, a bad choice, especially considering, like I said, they're pulling so many people from the 40s anyway. It seems like it would make sense to at least pick the best ones, but that's not what they did. So I would have liked to see Jesse Lopez up there. Number 12 for me for the men. Number 11 for me for the women is also a 40 cast member. This is from season 46, and it's Venus Vafa. So I really found Venus very refreshing, I guess you could say, um, on Survivor 46. And a big part of that is because it seems like a lot of the thought behind casting decisions these days is they're trying to cast people that are excited to be there. They're trying to cast good people, generally people with, like I said, the kind of these sob story backstories. And to me, that has resulted in some pretty dry casts where there just isn't a whole lot of conflict. There's not a whole lot of personalities clashing, which of course was a huge part of the appeal of the kind of golden days of Survivor. It, back in the 2000s. And the Venus, I got a glimpse of that again, where she did have a personality clash with a lot of people on her tribe at various times, and it led to some very entertaining moments. I really got a kick out of kind of her personality and the clashes that she was having with people. And she just kind of was good at the confessional style delivery as well. Like she was consistently giving gold when she was talking to the producers, talking to the camera one on one, and so that was very entertaining as well. And I think is critical for a great player of Survivor. And she actually did. She kind of had a little bit of that arc where she was sort of confident in herself, maybe incorrectly confident in herself, if you will, where she was definitely making a lot of mistakes. Obviously, she got voted out with an idol, one of many who were voted off with an idol on that season. But she also, I think, did have some chops, and I would love to see her play again, and I would just love to have that personality clash once again with some of the people on season 50, especially some of the all-time greats that I have, of course, selected to be on this cast if it was up to me. So I really enjoyed Venus, and I wish that we could have seen more of her. Number 11 on this list. This is also kind of a deep cut. This is a player that only played once. So everybody so far in the four that we've discussed have only played once. This guy goes back all the way to Survivor Palau. This is Ian Rosenberger. And Ian Rosenberger, if you're an old school fan of Survivor, you probably remember Ian. He was the one that was kind of had this tag team, if you will, with Tom Westman, who of course ultimately won the season, and he was a huge part of the success of the Karor tribe, which of course completely destroyed the Oolong tribe to the point where there was no merge on that season, which is the only time that's been the case. But what's so interesting about Ian, and he's a very happy-go-lucky guy. I think he was like a dolphin trainer. He and Tom, as they get to the end, go at odds, and they actually end up having this showdown, which in the final tribal or their final immunity challenge, where it's the longest immunity challenge in history, and it would have gone longer. Ian actually just decided to jump off the buoy to try to repair his relationship with Tom, which he decided was more important to him than winning the game. And so it would have been very interesting to see what would have happened if Tom and Ian actually had gone to the end together. That would be a fascinating what if scenario that didn't end up happening. But just the relationship between the two, I think, is one of the more interesting dichotomies that we've seen in all of Survivor. Like Tom and Ian were critical to that season, which I think would have been a pretty bad season of Survivor without them, because there was not a lot of strong characters in that cast. They really were leaning very heavily on the two of them, and so the fact that it came down to the two of them in that challenge was very poetic. And I would love to see Ian return, and particularly if Tom Westman return, which maybe we'll talk about him in a little bit. Going down to number 10, our top 10 now for the women. This is the first player that has played more than once. In fact, she's played three times, but it has been a decent amount of time since the last time she played. This is Andrea Bolek. Bolek. I've never really known exactly how to say her name. Boelk? Boelk? I'm not sure. But anyway, she was the originally from Redemption Island, and then she returned for the second fans versus favorites. And then, of course, she returned for Game Changers, despite the fact that she is, in fact, not a game changer. But I've always really enjoyed Andrea. She's one of my favorite women players. Well, obviously of all time, but particularly that debuted after the 20s. And one thing that I found on this list, by the way, that you'll notice is I pull a lot from the teens because I think we generally agree that if you're a longtime fan of Survivor, the teens is kind of the golden era of Survivor, and that was where they were just on a run of just awesome casts and seasons. But I was surprised that I had less. I had so few to pull from for the 20s that I thought were worthy of making the list, and it stood out to me with the actual cast because they actually don't pick anybody from the 20s, which I thought was surprising. I do, of course, pick a few people from the 20s, but I think it's only two people that I chose from the 20s. It's Andrea and then the next person on the women's list. But Andrea, I've always thought was an interesting presence. Like she's a great strategist, particularly in fans versus favorites. I don't remember a ton about her game in Game Changers, to be honest. That season sort of, I mean, I know she did well, but ended up being betrayed, I believe, by Officer Sarah, who of course ended up winning. But Kara Moen, Fans vs. Favorites 2 is definitely the one that I remember with her the most. That seemed like where she was playing the best game. I think that she definitely had winner's equity in that season. If just, obviously Cochran realized that and got rid of her with the blind side and made sure that she wasn't going to have the opportunity to win that game because I think that she was almost having a Parvati-esque game where she from the original fans versus favorites where she was sort of the bridge between the favorites and the fans in a similar way to how Parvati was for her alliance, and so I think that she would have gotten a lot of the fan vote, and then she might have grabbed some of the favorites votes as well. So I think that she was a real threat to win that season. I think she would have been a very good winner of that season, even though obviously Cochran ultimately won, and I think he's a very good winner as well. I don't, the thing about Andrea is that she's been on three seasons that have been pretty maligned, it seems, by the online community. Redemption Island, of course, a lot of people consider one of the worst seasons of Survivor, which I strongly disagree with. Same thing I hear with fans versus favorites too, which kind of blows my mind. Game Changers, I can understand the frustration with that season, but I think that comes down more to the naming convention of that season more so than the actual content of that season. I don't think it's like the best returning player season by any means. But I do think that it is a good season of Survivor, like an upper half season of Survivor. And Andrea is a key part of all of those. And even going back to Redemption Island, where of course she's not as important as because nobody really is that important outside of Boston Rob and Philip, and Russell Hantz at the very beginning. But I always thought that the sort of her relationship with Matt and the kind of guilt that she had with voting him out and kind of the bitterness that he ended up feeling toward her because she did that to him the second time, I always thought was very interesting and one of the more interesting sort of threads of that season as well. So I've always gotten a kick out of Andrea. I mean, I have to admit, I think she might be the most beautiful person that's ever played Survivor. So that might have something to do with my fandom of her. But I really think that just as a personality and as a strategic player, I think that she excels, and I definitely would like to have seen her return for season 50. At number 10 now for the men, we do have my third pick from the 40s. This is Q Burdett, and I am happy to say that Q is going to be on Survivor 50. So this is the first person that I have chosen that is actually aligning with who they actually chose for season 50. So that's very exciting. But Q, I recently just watched season 46. It's the last season that I watched in full. Really enjoyed it, as you can tell. I'm bringing back. I'm selecting Q and Venus, both from that season, to return. So it's got to be a pretty good season if I'm having multiple selections when I only have 24 spots. But Q was just constantly entertaining. Every time that he was on screen, it was gold. Whether it was trying to coach Banu about how to play the game, whether it was him causing chaos at tribal council, like considering quitting the game, whether it was him with his bumbling around with his Q skirt, whether it was him, totally owning Liz and not choosing her to go on the reward challenge despite her screams and pleas. Just like all those things were just total gold. And it's interesting that he ended up being not super liked on among the Survivor 46 cast, at least while they were out on the island, which I thought was interesting. But at home, I mean, Reagan and I were just totally eating up everything that he was giving us. So I am thrilled that Q is returning. He is a true gem from the 40s, and I'm looking forward to seeing him on my screen yet again, and in the actual season 50. At number nine now for the women, this is one of the two, it looks like, players that did participate in Winners at War that I would like to see return, and that is Natalie Anderson from season 29, and then, of course, from Winners at War. Natalie Anderson is one of my all-time favorite winners. She might be my all-time favorite female winner, other than, well, I mean, there's another one that definitely is in the running that we might talk about in a minute, but I just that original. I think my favorite storytelling arc, or just like my favorite arc overall for any individual season of Survivor, is her trajectory in San Juan del Sur, where, her twin sister is voted off first, so she's totally alone on this Blood versus Water season. She forms this bond with Jeremy, who, of course, ultimately goes on to be blindsided, but ultimately goes on to win the next time that he plays on Caramoan. So he definitely had some chops, and they were a dangerous duo to be sure. But then she just goes on this Kill Bill revenge quest for him, and the fact that it all happens and goes off without a hitch, and she's just so entertaining the way that she talks, does her confessionals talking about what she's going to do and how much she hates these people that she's with, which is very relatable because we as the audience, or at least certainly I, hated all the people that she was with as well, and I couldn't wait for her to, start cutting through them, and you have to wait. They do make you wait for it. It's almost like a Game of Thrones-esque storyline arc where you see the villains winning and they're winning and they're winning, and it's just like, man, are they ever going to get their comeuppance? And then of course they do, and it is beautifully satisfying. So I've always loved that. I've always been a huge Natalie fan because of that. And then at Winners at War, I understand that her game was kind of polarizing because she was obviously voted off first and then ended up coming back and into the game and coming in second place, being the runner up for the season. And while, I know that a lot of people just kind of have a problem with the Edge of Extinction aspect of the game in general. I thought that she was very entertaining throughout the whole thing, and collecting her 5 tokens and all that stuff, and just she was a constant. I thought presence in the show, despite being voted off first at the Edge of Extinction, and a constant thing that I was looking forward to seeing play out at the Edge of Extinction. She just completely dominated that portion of the game, was able to get back in, and even convince a couple of people on the jury to vote for her. So, and I am particularly glad that she was able to get second place, and that it didn't go to Michelle, because that would have been a shame. So love Natalie both times. I know she'd be absolutely entertaining and thrilling to watch if she returned again. Best of all, I don't think that she would even necessarily be viewed as big of a threat. She probably would be, just because just coming in as a winner, and I don't have that many winners on. I've chosen for my cast, so that might work against her. But I still don't think that she would be one of the top threats, and so I think that she would do well in a hypothetical season 50. So I hope that we see her again someday. But I sure would have liked to see her in season 50. She's definitely one of my favorite women players of all time. Up at number nine, this is the second player that actually is going to be coming back on Survivor 50, and that is Christian Hubicki from David versus Goliath. So Christian is one of those characters that it's just, as soon as they're on season one, or episode one of their season, you see him, you're like, okay, this is a slam dunk. This is a home run casting pick. It happens every once in a while. You don't get him on plenty of seasons of Survivor. Every season is not guaranteed to have one of these characters by any means. But Christian was just one of those home runs where it was like, there's no doubt that the next time they have a returning player season, he's going to be at the top of the list. And it just turned out that they didn't have a returning player season other than Winners of War, which obviously he didn't qualify for an extended period since David vs. Goliath, which I think aired in like 2018. So he was just super entertaining. I really enjoyed his relationship with Gabby Pascuzzi, and I considered her for my female list. She just didn't end up quite making the cut because I would have liked to see how she interacted with him. But still, like even without that, he was great. He was gold with everybody that he was with. He was able to he was so charismatic, so charming and entertaining, so able to work with such a wide variety of people. I remember, think back on his relationship with the Bruchachos with John Morrison, which was crazy to me because I ended up, I watched him as a wrestling fan as a teenager, and so like seeing him on Survivor was crazy, and seeing him befriend this just physics geek was so fun to see. And yeah, I just, I loved every second of him, just like everybody else did. And so it's a no-brainer that he would be on Survivor 50, and I'm glad to see that he's going to be there, and it's definitely well deserved. Going up to number 8 for the women now. My number 8 pick is somebody that we have not seen. She has played twice, but we have not seen her since Heroes versus Villains, and we almost didn't really see her in Heroes versus Villains because she was the first boot. My number 8 pick for the women is Sugar Kuiper, from originally from Survivor Gabon. I guess you could call her a runner-up for Survivor Gabon. I don't actually know if she ended up. She definitely didn't get any votes, but I don't know that Susan got any votes either. Um, okay, second runner-up. So I guess Susan got some votes. Susie Smith, whatever her name was. Oh yeah, it actually ended up being close. It was a 4-3 vote. So yeah, it's been a while since I've seen Gabon, I guess. But yeah, so she was not well liked on her season by her fellow contestants. But Gabon, Gabon. If you haven't seen Gabon, what the thing that's so great about Gabon is that it is just such a completely beautiful, chaotic mess. Jeff Probst famously hated the season because it was so imbalanced. With the Fong tribe just being a complete disaster, having no chance against the Koda tribe, and you had so many chaotic personalities in there. You had, of course, Randy. You had Ken. You had Crystal, the Olympic gold medalist that could not compete in a single challenge. And then you had Sugar, who was the greatest chaos agent of them all. Where every episode, you literally had no idea what Sugar was going to do, and a big part of that was because I don't think Sugar herself knew what she was going to do. She was just totally winging it the entire time. She was the definition of a chaotic good, if you can, want to put her on the alignment chart. And so she was just so unbelievably entertaining. She had all the stuff in the Sugar Shack. She had her relationship with Ace, who she turned on. She turned on people left and right. It's not a surprise that she, was not well liked by that cast because she betrayed everybody multiple times, probably by the time it was all over, just because of how erratic her gameplay was, but it was so entertaining to watch. And so I would love to have that chaotic energy, kind of similar to Venus. I definitely would like to see the two of them interact for sure. But I just would love to inject some of that chaotic energy into season 50. And I wish that we could have seen Sugar doing that, especially now that she's a middle aged woman at this point. She's 46, so that would have been a very interesting to see an older Sugar. So, but anyway, that we're not getting that obviously, but I sure would have loved to see it. Number 8 for the men. This is another one where it just kind of blows my mind that this person is not back on Survivor 50, and that's Dominic Abate, who was, of course, famously the runner-up of Survivor Ghost Island and actually tied with the winner of that season, Wendell Holland, and resulted in the second runner-up, Laurel, having to cast her vote for the winner. I think as soon as that was the case, I think probably Dominic knew his fate was sealed there, and she did end up voting for Wendell, and Dominic lost the game. But just almost out of sense of fairness, you almost have to have Dominic back just because he's the only person in Survivor history that tied for the win, and then of course ultimately lost because of the tiebreaker. So it's like if anybody deserves to return, it would be him. And then on top of that, he was obviously a very entertaining character. He had the big rivalry with that idiot. I forget his name, but that blonde guy. That was very entertaining. And then, of course, he had sort of the alliance slash rivalry with Wendell, which really came into focus the later the season went on, culminating in the final episode where Dominic wins the final challenge, forces Wendell to make fire. Wendell wins the fire making challenge, comes back, and they tie, defeat him. And they were just such a great duo. They were so evenly matched, but they had different strengths, right? Like Dominic was very strategic and a very strong strategic mind, where you had Wendell, who was very good with interpersonal relationships and building those up with various members of the cast, and obviously that ended up coming back to be in his favor. And it's an example of how your relationship building is consistently the most important aspect of the game in Survivor. The thing is, Dominic was very good at that too. Like he would have for sure won that game if it wasn't for Wendell coming into the end with him. And that's one of the rare cases where the fire making challenge probably did increase the intrigue of the season in the sense that it Wendell might not have made it to the end if it wasn't for that. So Dom got screwed by it, but it also led to a photo finish between the two of them, which we enjoyed. But it just seems crazy that they're not bringing him back, especially since they have a you'd think that they would have a decent chunk of 30s people returning. They have so many from the 40s, but since there has been no returning player season since Game Changers other than Winners at War, so anybody that played 35 and onward has not had the opportunity to return, and so you'd think that they would have a lot of those, and they do have a decent chunk. It's just I just really disagree with the ones that they selected, unfortunately. But Dom, surely he's going to come back at some point. It seems crazy to me that he was not chosen for this season, and I think it's a shame that he wasn't. Okay, number 7 on this list. This is my final pick from the 40s, and I think she is the greatest character that we have seen from the 40s. One of the great players that we've seen from the 40s in terms of strategy and relationship building. This is Shan Smith from Survivor 41. Now, I'm pretty critical of Survivor 41 overall as a season. I do think it had a pretty strong cast compared to some of the other season 40 or 40 seasons, but the execution was lacking for me. It definitely has a very lame winner, which hurts a season a lot generally. And then also just a lot of the great players like Shan, went kind of not early. Of course, she made it to the jury, but earlier than you would have liked to see for it to be a satisfying conclusion. But man, Shan was just so entertaining while she was there. My favorite thing about her was the fact that she had this little villainous song that she would sing in her head that they actually made into an actual piece of music for the season, which the music nerd in me absolutely loved that. But she also was just a really great player. She kind of had this alliance slash rivalry with Ricard, which was very interesting. But she also had the bond with the other African American members of the season, and she just couldn't get things to work between them, and it all kind of came crashing down. And she kind of knew that she was got to deal with Ricard at some point. Ricard took he shot first basically, and that was kind of spelled doom for her game. But she was just a great character, a great strategic mind, would have been an amazing winner. And it's just baffling to me that she is not back for season 50. To me, she is far and away the best player, character, just total package that we have seen in the 40s. And for her not to return is just baffling to me, especially considering how many people from the 40s they do have returning. So that's a shame. Number 7. This is my first. Well, that's not true. So this is technically the oldest player that we're going to talk about so far in terms of when his season aired, because this is a character that goes all the way back to season 3 Survivor Africa, so even further back than Dina and Survivor Amazon. But he did return for All Stars as well. This is Lex Vandenberg, and so Africa is another season for me where kind of similar to Tom and Ian's season at Palau, where it really leaned on a couple of key characters, and if it wasn't for those characters, it would be a complete disaster of a season. I think at the time it was a noticeable step down in the eyes of many from Borneo and Australian Outback. Honestly, I kind of like it better than Australia because I think that's a pretty dull season itself. But certainly, if you compare it to Survivor Borneo, it is a huge step down. It has a really, really bad cast overall, but it had a couple bright spots. Ethan's on the winner, obviously Big Tom, and Lex Vandenberg being the kind of third piece of that puzzle. And Lex to me is such a fascinating what if player for Survivor. I don't think that he really had a great chance to win Africa because he played a little too paranoid, and he just wasn't as likable as Ethan, and it just seemed like Ethan was a shoe-in to make it to the end no matter sort of how things broke down. He did, however, get screwed in Survivor Africa because the Final Four challenge was this like quiz basically where they're quizzing you about other people that played the game, and they said that he got the wrong answer because it wasn't the answer they were looking for when they asked like who doesn't have any piercings or something like that. But the person that he wrote down actually also did not have piercings, so he got screwed and he ended up actually getting $100,000 as a result of that. But they brought him back for All Stars, which is definitely my favorite incarnation of Lex because Lex to me clearly was going to win Survivor All Stars. He was aligning himself with people that he knew that he was going to be able to defeat. He was eliminating his threats that were his friends in real life, and he was like, potentially damaging those relationships with Ethan and Colby, getting rid of them on that green tribe, Mogo Mogo, so that he could control the less popular players like your Jerrys, your Kathys, your Sheans. And he was going to take one of those, we don't know who, to the end. And he was, I think, for sure going to win that game. He had it all wrapped up by the time that they were going to get to the merge. The only fatal flaw in that is that he bafflingly decided to save Amber when he could have gotten rid of her whenever she was sent over to that tribe, and eliminate Jerry instead, who, anybody probably could have beat Jerry in that season. This was back when Jerry was absolutely despised, particularly among, some of her fellow contestants. And so then he was immediately betrayed by Boston Rob in, one of the most legendary sequences and betrayals in the history of the show. And it's an amazing just development. It's amazing storytelling. It's just absolute gold. Especially because back then, everybody cared deeply. This was like real life to them, especially in these, among these early survivors where, the game was a lot more personal. They had so much more investment in it, and they were a lot more famous too. A lot more people were watching Survivor at this time. So it just kind of seemed like this, even though the price was the same, the stakes were kind of higher in that way. And Lex was just playing such an amazing game. And I really think that he had it in the bag, but he just made that one fatal mistake, thinking that it was going to pay off at some point later down the line. It didn't. He was betrayed by Boston Rob. My understanding is that they had very strained relationship after that, and he kind of had a strained relationship with everything associated with Survivor. I think he had a strained relationship with even Jeff Probst after that somehow. So Lex, he definitely took it personal. He was one of the most bitter jurors that we've ever seen. But that's kind of part of what I like about him is that he just took it so serious. It was real to him, and that's the kind of level of investment that you just don't get. I feel from a lot of the players today and I think that we're kind of missing that level of intensity that Lex brought to the game, and I just think that he deserves another shot considering how good of a game that he was playing. And of course, now it's been so long since then, it would be very interesting to see if he could keep up with the modern pace of Survivor. Now, granted, he would be an old competitor at this point. He's 62 years of age. So it would be interesting to kind of see, kind of a older, squirrelier Lex, perhaps, competing in a modern game of Survivor. How well would he do? Hard to say, but I certainly would love to see him have another crack at it. So with that, we are now moving into the top half of the list, the top 12 overall, top six women, top six men. And my number six woman draft pick for Survivor 50 would be Amanda Kimmel. And this is actually someone that I believe was going to be on Survivor 50, and there was like some sort of conflict, and so she was sort of withdrawn at the very end. Um, so yes, it says here on the wiki that Amanda was contacted to compete on In the Hands of the Fans, initially accepted, but later dropped out last minute due to scheduling issues. And obviously that's not something that I was able to take into consideration whenever I was making my picks for this cast. And so obviously Amanda, we don't know what her scheduling conflict was, but she was unable to participate in season 50. But like I said, I'm not really taking that into consideration here. I'm actually just going with who I would pick, regardless of all these people are alive. That's basically that was basically my only criteria here. But Amanda, she's one of the all-time great women players. We have not seen her since Heroes versus Villains, but had she's an all-timer and since that back-to-back seasons, season 15 and season 16, she not only played very well in those seasons. She made it all the way to the end in both of those seasons and lost both of those seasons. And then, and honestly, in season 20, I think she had a lot of winner's equity in that season as well. It's just that she sort of was undone by mistakes made by other members of her alliance that she was unable to recover from. But still, like amazing strategist. I mean, you could even argue the greatest female strategist in the history of Survivor. I don't think that I would put her at that top spot, but certainly should be in the top five. And Amanda was just a entertaining character as well. Like I think that she gets a little bit of a bad rap of being very subdued, and she was subdued to some degree. But she's obviously famously in the most one of the most entertaining alliances of all time with the Black Widow Brigade alongside Parvati and Suri and some of those other women from Fans versus Favorites. But she also was in a very entertaining tribe and alliance on China as well with obviously Todd the Game Warden flight attendant, but then you had Courtney and the lunch lady whose name I can't remember off the top of my head, and John Robert and James. Off the top of my head, I believe she was the first to ever win or make it to the end in back-to-back seasons. I gotta check myself on that. There's definitely not in 7 to 8, and then 10 to 11. And I'm just trying to think of when they were returning player season. So I think Friends versus Favorites was only the third returning player season. So she had to have been the first to make it to the end of the game back to back, which of course was replicated by only a very few number of players after her. Let's see. It's she's the first to do it. That would be followed by Russell Hantz, Nora South. Oh, okay. No, that's not the same thing. I know that Russell did it as well in 19 and 20. They're the only ones that I can think of. They might be the only two people that have ever done that feat because very few people have even played back-to-back seasons and then much less make it to the end. So she's unbelievable to be able to do both of those things, and especially in they were strategic seasons, Fans versus Favorites more so than China, but those were no those casts were no slouch. It was tough competition in some of those. And she lost both of those games, but she still played really strong games. Like with going up against Parvati, she just didn't have the relationships that Parvati had with the fans, and so that kind of hamstrung her. Even though she still did very well, and came close to winning. The one with Todd is, I think, the one where Todd just really hit it out of the park in the final tribal council arguments, and she just wasn't able to quite hit those same arguments that he was able to do, which ended up working against her there. So she's kind of just got out debated on that one. And then on Heroes versus Villains, I think she was definitely the best player on the Heroes tribe, and she just wasn't quite able to overcome the mistakes that JT in particular made. As they famously he gave his idol to Russell Hantz, and it was all kind of downhill from there. And she was unable to trick Parvati, into she was kind of trying to misdirect her using their prior relationship and their history, which Parvati didn't fall for because she's an amazing player as well. But she still, to this day, I believe, according to this wiki here, holds the record for the most days on Survivor without being voted out at 108, which is a record that's not likely to be broken anytime soon, considering the fact that seasons are, of course, shorter now. Yeah, obviously Amanda is an all-time classic competitor. She's a legend, and she definitely should be back. I'm glad to hear that she was at least going to be back, and then scheduling conflicts unfortunately prevented that. So, but hopefully we'll see her back at some point in the future. Number 6 for the men. This is, I'm happy to report, one of the few that I have listed here that actually is going to be returning, and that is my boy Coach, originally from Survivor Tocantins, also from Heroes versus Villains, and South Pacific. Coach is one of my favorite players of all time, easily in my top 5. He's just so unbelievably entertaining. But what's so great about Coach too is that he's played 3 times, and he was entertaining, I feel, in different ways each time. And obviously in the original season in Tocantins, that was where I thought he was at his best, at his entertainment peak. He was just kind of a goof, a fool, very full of himself. Kind of did the whole martyr thing on the Exile Island, and then just all of his relationships was just absolute gold, and truly the greatest lineup of confessionals from anybody ever. He just kind of had this character about him that was on a level that nobody had matched at that time in the game, and you could argue have not matched since then. And in Heroes vs. Villains, he still had a little bit of that, but it was a lot more heartfelt. I felt like he kind of had like these a lot of these moments of honesty about him, I guess, just groundedness. Like whenever he was legitimately upset at Sandra, his her words against him at tribal council, and Tyson had to come back and be like, "Hey, man, sort of talk him up and give him some advice on how to manage relationships." And the weird thing with Jerry, where they kind of had a little bit of a relationship going, that was very interesting to see. And he sort of obviously got caught up in the whirlwind that was Russell Hantz, but he did kind of he didn't exactly do everything he could to prevent that from happening. I guess you could say, just because of unwittingly to a degree went along with Russell Hantz and kind of you know he was able to be used in a way where he wasn't really working with Rob to the degree that he could, where he kind of was throwing away votes on Courtney and things like that at inopportune times to try to prevent the Russell train from rolling over. And then in season 23, it's kind of almost the most fascinating version of Coach because, and also the one where I think he was the most impressive. And I'm really upset that Coach didn't win season 23. I understand why he didn't because, and it's almost poetic that he didn't because he basically was a cult leader on season 23. And, that typically doesn't turn out too well in the end for the cult leader. That in history can tell you that. But he just went into that season so on the outs of that tribe, as compared to Ozzy. He was immediately stacked up against Ozzy, lost in that immediately in that challenge, of course, because it's Ozzy in his prime. And Ozzy's tribe was just so happy to have him. They wouldn't even consider voting him off. Whereas everybody on Coach's tribe, not everybody, but a lot of the people on Coach's tribe were like, oh man, we got this goof. He's an idiot. He's no Ozzy. We need to get rid of him because what's he gonna do for us? And to go from that to completely, I mean, completely controlling that tribe to such a degree that, Boston Rob levels of control that he exerted on that tribe. It is truly fascinating social psychology to see that play out. And then whenever you go into the merge, with even numbers, and he has to convince Cochran to flip over to him, and the way that he's able to do that, and he just so deftly meets Cochran where he's at and convinces him to turn on his former tribe and doom them in the process. It's just so unbelievably well done and entertaining, and he just absolutely, in my opinion, absolutely deserved to win for that move alone. Not to mention all of the other impressive things that he did that season. Obviously, ultimately, he got blown out by Sophie in the end, and I think that that's really disappointing and hurts that season overall. And it's also sadly why we couldn't have him at Winners at War. But at least we're bringing him back now, and I'm glad that he's there. He should have been a no-brainer. He probably was a no-brainer to bring back, and I'm very interested to see what version of Coach we get this time. I fully expect him to be different yet again than he's ever been in his previous iterations, especially considering he played three times over the span of just a few years, and now it's been many years since season 23 that we have seen him. So, I mean, literally more than half of the show has played out since the last time that he played. So, I'm very curious to see what version of Coach we're going to get in Survivor 50, but I have no doubt, regardless of what version it is, it's going to be entertaining. So, now getting into the top 10 and my number 5 for the women. This is probably the character, the person that I think is probably least likely to return out of everybody on this cast. I don't think we're ever going to see this person again on Survivor. But she is one of my picks, one of my two picks to come from the original cast of Survivor on season 1, Borneo. This is Sue Hawk, who I argue is the original villain of Survivor, a true Survivor game changer in the way that she sort of laid out the idea of the jury speech. Her jury speech is very iconic, and she is somebody that just reveled in villainy. She loved that she was able to lie to people and convince them that she was going to be voting a certain way and then vote a different way. And yet she was also a very entertainingly bitter member of the cast, where she almost made it to the end, ultimately was betrayed by her allies, and then really held it against Kelly in particular, who she, of course, lambasted in her speech, and I think was I don't know how if she convinced anybody to vote for Rich. Probably not. If anything, it seemed like it kind of did the opposite, where people were upset at what she said, and it kind of made them feel sympathy for Kelly at that time. But it's such an iconic moment that lives in Survivor forever, and left an indelible impact on the show. We've seen so many try to replicate that, but it's never anywhere near to the same degree. And then, of course, she came back for All Stars, and she was, very entertaining on All Stars as well. Until unfortunately they had the whole thing with Richard Hatch, and she sort of accused him of being inappropriate, and then just kind of screamed at Jeff and quit the show. So I think for that reason, that kind of her exit and how explosive it was, and how uncomfortable it was, I think it's probably very unlikely that we're ever going to see her return. Gosh, she is just one of my all-time favorite players of the game. She is such a character. And the great thing about Sue is that it is authentic. Sometimes people come on Survivor and I think they try to play up these aspects of their personality and try to be characters on the show. Um, but Sue Hawk was a character on the show because she just is a character in real life, and so she was just an absolute delight. A crucial part of why season one was so entertaining and such a masterclass of television. And I think that just imagine the entertainment that would be there, even if she was only there for a single episode on Survivor 50. Just makes my head spin. But like I said, I know that it's an unbelievable long shot that we'd ever see her back, but God, would I love to see it. Okay, my number five draft pick for the men is Rob Cesternino, who has only played twice, but it's almost like he's only played once because he was voted off at the first tribal council that he was able to be voted off on All Stars, because Boss and Rob quickly identified him as a major threat to him correctly, and got rid of him the first chance that he got. But Rob Cesternino, obviously famously the podcast host today, but also just revolutionized the way the game was played in the early days of Survivor. He was widely respected as the greatest player to not win the game for an extended period of time. And, I think some people probably could argue that still to this day. I wouldn't argue that, but he would definitely be up there. The thing about Rob C is he was such a strategist. He was able to flip back and forth between different alliances and still convince the people that he had betrayed previously to work with him again. And that was just something that we had never seen at that stage of Survivor. Now we see stuff like that all the time, and I think the game is engineered in a way to encourage that, where they have three tribes instead of two, and they have all these mix-ups, and they have all these twists, and there's so many mechanics in the game that sort of incentivize people to do that. But back at that time, that was not the case. Typically, you picked an alliance and you stuck with it through the entire game. It was all about tribe loyalty and tribe strength and things of that nature. And Rob C just eschewed all of that and totally changed the book on the way Survivor was played. And on top of that, he was also just an extremely entertaining character. He was the most entertaining character that season. His confessionals were legendary. It was hilarious him talking about how Heidi's a 9 in real life and she's maybe a 6 right now, which is perfect for a guy like me. The way that he would talk about his greatest ally, Matt, who he really did not like very much, and it kind of got on his nerves, but that he continued to kind of had to string along because he was a useful tool for him, kind of a useful idiot, I guess. And just like the way that he would navigate that relationship was highly entertaining. He would, sending him on side quests and things to occupy his time while he was actually, going around and trying and actually playing the game. So Rob C was just absolute gold on Survivor Amazon, obviously, and I think that he's probably the player, certainly one of the top players that is probably would be the most popular with the audience for them to bring back. And so I wouldn't have been surprised if they did bring him back for the season. I'm not necessarily surprised that they didn't, just because he's such a public facing figure now, and he has had plenty of criticisms of the show. He's not shy about that, and so I don't know that his relationship with CBS and Survivor and Jeff Probst and all that is super strong. And so that, I think, probably works against him. I think his reputation works against him. But obviously, it would be amazing to see him play again. I think that he should play again. And I hope that at some point that we get to see it. That would definitely be a hype moment. But this really would have been a great time for that to take place. So it's a shame that it's not. Okay, up at number four now. She's a woman that needs no introduction. I did go ahead and put Parvati at number four. Like I said, I kind of tried to cut back on the players that have played a lot and that I've played recently. Both of those are true for Parvati. She was on the last returning player season at Winners at War, and it was, you know, her worst season, definitely, in terms of just her character and her strategy. But she is such a legend in the game. She's one of the most iconic winners of all time with her win on Fans versus Favorites. And then the fact that she almost won again in Heroes versus Villains, she very easily could have had that spot instead of Sandra being the first two-time winner, except for that people kind of held her relationship with Russell against her. Would but still like an amazing season. Both of those seasons. I mean, you often will see them if you see people rank their seasons, their favorite seasons. You'll often see Heroes versus Villains at number one, Fans versus Favorites at number two, or vice versa. And I think Parvati is a huge reason of why that is, and just the what she was able to accomplish in Heroes versus Villains as well, coming in as I would argue maybe having the biggest target on her back of anybody that season and still making it to the end. It's amazing what she was able to do and pulling off big flashy moves over the course of that as well, like the double idol play that is probably her most famous calling card. But Parvati is obviously a legend in the game. I haven't watched the Australian Survivor, but I hear that she was amazing in that as well, and that in fact, she was so good that people are really starting to consider whether she might be um, the greatest player of all time. And I think that that's probably really interesting to see. It's definitely something that I probably should watch because I understand that obviously she was able to win that season. So Parvati's a legend in the game. It's a kind of an undisputed fact, regardless of what criteria you use. She's an amazing strategist. She's an amazing character. She's just great all around. And so she's my number four pick for the women. Going on to my number four pick for the men, we have Tom Westman, who I mentioned earlier, kind of talking about Ian. So we don't have to get too deep into Tom here. Don't want to regurgitate that aspect of the game, which was extremely entertaining, his relationship with Ian. But also, Tom is viewed, especially was viewed at the time, as kind of a heroic winner. I don't really view Tom that way. I actually think that he did some pretty dark stuff the way that he was able to manipulate Ian and kind of ensure his win. Which I think was really interesting. But Tom is such an amazing leader. I think he's the greatest leader that we've ever seen on Survivor. The fact that he was able to lead his tribe, Karor, to completely and utterly dominate the competition to the point where there wasn't even a merge because they had just completely eviscerated that tribe other than Stephanie. It really is amazing, and it really does come down to Tom's leadership that they were able to do that, in my opinion. I mean, he did this thing, and they talked about it on the season where he kind of he intentionally went out of his way to check in with everybody every day and kind of see what they needed and whether they were happy and if there's anything that he could do to sort of help them, and that's just great gameplay. It was great gameplay then in the early days when he played. He played on season 10 where. The interpersonal relationships was definitely the most important aspect of the game even today, where strategy is a lot more important than it was back then, those interpersonal relationships are still very important, and I think that it would be interesting to see somebody who excels at that, arguably one of the greatest that there's ever been to play at that level, sort of bring that old school approach into the new game. And so I would love to see that. But, I don't think that we're ever going to see Tom Westman play again, unfortunately, just because, he's getting up there in age. He's 62 now as well, same age as Lex. And, people probably are getting less interested and that's the discomfort of Survivor when you start getting into your 60s. But then again, you have your Rudies of the world who played whenever he was 78 or 5 or whatever the hell he was. So you never know. But and then he didn't do as anywhere near as well on his return for Heroes versus Villains. But one thing that Tom did do that season, which in the end probably kind of helped spell doom for the heroes in a way, but also was very impressive the way that he did it, which was his elimination of Suri. He was definitely the main catalyst behind that move. He was the one pushing for it. He was the one that executed on it and sort of figured out a way to execute on it, even though he was losing allies left and right. He'd already lost Stephanie, and JT was wishy-washy on him, and he was definitely outnumbered, but they figured out a way to do it and finagle that move, and it's an all-time great move. So, we got a glimpse of the strategic depth that Tom could offer. So, Tom, I think, is just a total package. He's one of my favorite winners of all time. He's one of my favorite players of all time. I would love, love, love to see him return. It blows my mind that he was not on Winners at War. Surely they asked him, but I don't know if they did. I have no way of knowing. And it's really surprising too because I know that Jeff Probst previously has ranked Tom very high among his favorite winners of all time, and he ranked Palau very high on his favorite seasons, but leading in the lead up to Heroes versus Villains, just because largely because of Tom. And so I was really surprised that he didn't come back for Winners at War. That might just speak to the idea that maybe he just doesn't run a return, and that would be a shame. But boy, would I love to see him come back and bring some of that old school gameplay to this new school game. And I'd be very interested in seeing how he would be able to deal with that. And my prediction is that he would do very well. Okay, up at number three now. My number three pick for the women is Suri, who of course is in fact returning for season 50, which is very exciting. I think she's the fourth and final person that I would like to see return that actually is returning. She's obviously my top pick for people to return that is returning. And the thing about Suri, she had a lot of things working against her on this list in terms of my criteria, just because she has played four times. She's played somewhat recently, like as recently as she possibly could, considering that she was on the last returning player season that she qualified for. But Suri is just such a great player and such a great character that even though she's played four times before Survivor 50, there's just no way that I could justify, and that apparently CBS could justify not bringing her back. And a big part of that also, it's kind of similar to Dom, where it's like it's a question of fairness, where the last time that she played on Game Changers, she was not voted out of the game. There was just so much gimmickry and advantages and crap going around that literally she was the only person that could be voted for, and so she was eliminated by default, which is, I would argue, a failure of the game, and definitely warrants a return, just for fairness' sake. So I'm glad that she is returning, and I hope that she will do well. She has done remarkably well in three of the four seasons that she returned. The only time that she didn't was on Heroes versus Villains, where, like I said, Tom Westman was able to eliminate her, and that was just an all-time move. So it'd be difficult for that to be replicated. But she comes in with such a reputation for being one of the all-time greats. In my opinion, she is the greatest player who has ever played that has not won the game. And I think that she would have won at least two of the four seasons that she played, maybe even three, because I think there's a strong chance that she would have won Game Changers as well if she had made it to the end and hadn't gotten screwed with the whole idol thing. But I definitely think that she would have won her original season, Exile Island, where she was going to go to the end with Aris, but she lost the fire making challenge against Danielle. I also think that she would have won Fans versus Favorites. It's not a guarantee because Parvati did have a lot of equity among the fans, but so it's possible that, Amanda had some advantages too. She had the relationship with Ozzy, so she had at least that guaranteed vote, and she kind of had a relationship with James. Considering that they played back to back and they had a special relationship, so it's possible that I'm wrong, and it's possible that Suri actually would have come in last. But I think that it would have been a photo finish because I think that she would have gotten some votes and she would have been very good at explaining, her path to the end. I think that Suri at least would have deserved to win Fans versus Favorites because really there's no way that Amanda and Parvati make it to the end if Suri does not choose them over Jonathan Pinner's alliance. So I think that she deserved the win. Both of those seasons, arguably 34 as well. 20 is the only one where she went early, and that was because of Tom Westman. So I think that she's the greatest player that's never played, but also that's never won. But I also think that she's just such a consistently entertaining character. No matter what she's doing, she is absolute gold on the mic. She's so good interpersonally. I think she's a legitimate game changer in the way in the strategy of the game, in the way that she has targeted individuals in a way that you don't often see. Like I go back to Exile Island where she decided to target Courtney, who a lot of people were kind of, she was an unpopular player, right? And so a lot of people were kind of like, hey, I wouldn't mind going to the end with Courtney. She's somebody that I can definitely win against. Suri was in a position where she could win against anybody, right? So at that point, Courtney, who obviously she could easily defeat, becomes her biggest threat because she's taking a potential spot away from her, especially in that time when it was only a final two instead of a final three. And so, turning the strategy of who needs to go on its head in that way is something that has only been done a few times in the history of the game, and Suri is definitely one of the players responsible for that. So very happy that she's going to be returning. I hope she does well. She's definitely going to have a massive target on her back, arguably the biggest of anybody in the game, which is saying something because there's definitely some haymakers in the season. So it would be a very difficult hill for her to climb, especially because obviously Suri is not getting any younger as well. She's never been in the best of shape at the best of times, and her first season was all the way back on season 12, so she's got to be at least in her um 50s now. Let's see how old Suri is. Suri is 55. Yeah. So, you know, it's not going to get any easier for her, but at the same time she's been through worse and this is obviously a shorter season, so she'll probably do that probably won't be an issue. Will she be able to get ahead of the threat level that she's going to be? We'll see, but I'm excited that she's at least going to get the shot. Well deserved. Looking forward to seeing Suri on the actual season 50. All right, that brings us to our final five and my number three male pick. And this is also somebody who was on Suri's original season, Exile Island. So that would be very interesting to see them interact. Sadly, we're not going to be able to see that on the actual season 50. But this player has only played once. It was only played on Exile Island, and that is of course Shane Powers, one of the most entertaining and unhinged players of Survivor I think of all time. Shane famously was a chain smoker that just gave up smoking cold turkey to go on Exile Island. And boy, did that have an impact on his psyche, which was readily apparent to all. He was absolutely unhinged, had a crazy temper, would snap at people, had a black what he called a blackberry that was like a rock that he typed on. He just was a kind of like Coach, really was just like a constant source of entertainment and just chaos, and in the best ways. And Shane is another one of those where it's just like there's been so many times where he's almost returned and it just didn't quite work out. I believe the first was Heroes versus Villains, where he was earmarked for the Villains tribe and then his spot got taken by Russell Hantz, which is understandable, but I definitely wish that we could have given up somebody else instead of Shane. And then he was going to come back, I believe, versus Coach in South Pacific, and something didn't work out there. And so they ended up subbing in Ozzy instead. And then even in Second Chance season 31, he was up for the vote. And I was just so excited to see him because he was definitely the one that I wanted to get back the most. And he didn't get in, which is just devastating. And so it just hasn't ever worked out for Shane to return. And, by now he was on the older man tribe at that time because they split him up by age, and now Shane is, actually he's only 55, which is surprising. Actually, I thought that he might be older than that. So it's definitely possible for him to return in terms of his age and health, unless that of course all the chain smoking caught up with him, which is certainly possible. But he's one of the most entertaining survivors of all time, and I just desperately would love to see him return, but it hasn't happened yet. So, he's the kind of person also though that just doesn't really get cast today. He's not the most politically correct person in the world. He did at one point threaten to go to the apartment of another member of the cast and murder her on Survivor season 12. So there's some things that he said that probably didn't age too well. But man, would I love to see him, and I just feel like it slipped away the opportunity, but he would be absolutely as entertaining as ever. I have no doubt. Another very entertaining, just one of the lippiest members of people that have ever played the game. And one of the most memorable, in my opinion, is Courtney Yates, who is my number two pick to return for the women. She played originally in Survivor China, in which she made it all the way to the end and got received, I believe, at least a vote at the end, and so she had some at least some winners equity at in Survivor China. Then she returned for Heroes versus Villains as a villain, and I guess she was a villain, considered a villain just because of her how lippy she was and how she uh, but she did sort of disrespect the religion of the people that were there in the introductory episode, which was to humorous effect. Although she really I always kind of viewed her as more of a hero. She obviously was a huge underdog just because of her stature. She's very thin and very small. And then also she had this rivalry with the certainly villainous Jean Robert during China, so it was a little bit of a stretch to consider her a villain. But she was absolute gold both times. Sadly, she wasn't as big of a factor in Heroes versus Villains. She was just kind of more of a pawn in Russell and Boston Rob's game to try to, dominate the villains tribe. But in both seasons, even when she's not a big strategic force, she is an absolute well of entertainment and just a glorious person to behold in every sense of the word. And so I definitely would love to see Courtney return. And I have no doubt that she would only get more entertaining with age. She'd have plenty more to complain about, plenty more to comment on, and especially with just the way that they cast people again. Like there's just she just had this negative edge to her, but that was so entertaining that it's such a shame that they just don't really cast people like that anymore. And she would be a breath of fresh air, I think. Number two for the men. My number two pick for the men is the original winner of Survivor. That is Richard Hatch from Survivor Borneo, and then he did return in Survivor All Stars. Richard Hatch is one of those again that I think would have returned at some point in various seasons of Survivor, but it just didn't work out. I think he certainly would have been on Heroes versus Villains as a villain, but that was whenever he was still under house arrest because he actually was arrested for not paying taxes on his $1 million winnings from the first season of Survivor. And then I feel like there's maybe been other times where maybe he was under consideration but didn't ultimately make the cut. He's another one that I feel would be at risk of never being asked back just because of, like I said, kind of with Sue Hawks, the uncomfortable nature of that situation, and especially with this very politically correct time. So I kind of doubt that we're ever going to see Richard Hatch play again, but boy, would it be entertaining and fascinating to see the original winner, the man who wrote the playbook of Survivor and how to win Survivor that everybody has followed in some way or another. Everybody who's ever made an alliance with somebody has followed in his footsteps to some degree. And to see how he would be able to adapt, or if he would be able to adapt to the modern game, which is so flashy, so fast moving, and so much less of an emphasis on those interpersonal relationships, it would be so fascinating to see how he would do. And I think he would probably do better than you might expect for an old timer, but I think it would be a long shot, of course, for him to win. But can you imagine if he came back for season 50 and won season 50? That would be like an all time headline for the ages in the history of television. But yeah, Richard Hatch should have been a no-brainer for Survivor 50 in my opinion. If you're trying to sort of celebrate the history of the show, but that's not the direction that they went. But definitely my number two pick for the men, and that just leaves my top picks for both the men and the women. We're gonna go with the women first, and this is definitely one of my more left field picks, but I think, whenever I sort of looked at my list of my favorite women of all time and who I think I would be the most excited to see return, I arrived at number one, Shambo Waters from Survivor Samoa. Now, obviously, I have a soft spot for Samoa. I mentioned at the top that was the first season of Survivor that I ever watched, and Shambo was a huge character on that season. But Shambo has never returned, and I believe she has been asked to return and has declined. So, I understand that it's probably not in the cards for her to actually come back for season 50. It is like unlikely to happen. And then she also, let's see how old she is. She is now 61. So, she'd definitely be on the older side, and I can understand why she would want to put herself through that again. But Shambo was such an entertaining character on Survivor Samoa. She was, without question, the most entertaining person on Galoo. But just like every time that she was on screen, it was utter gold. I loved the hatred and contempt that she had for her fellow tribe member Laura and how Russell was able to use that to his advantage. And I loved the just sort of the personality clash that she had with the rest of her tribe. And then like how she was embraced by the kind of losers and geeks over on Foa Foa. And she ended up just being like this hugely important character and player in the game, even though she was sort of viewed at the beginning as just sort of a total outcast. And it's kind of a miracle that she was even able to make it that deep in the game. But that was because Galu was so dominant in the game that they rarely had to go to tribal council. I think they only went to one tribal council before the merge. So Shambo is an all-time classic. I think that she is one of, if not the most entertaining women that has ever played the game, and definitely I think the of all the women that have only played once, definitely the most entertaining and would be bring me the most joy to see return. And so that's why she is my number one. And then for the men, my number one, also from Survivor Samoa, it's Russell Hantz, baby. So, Russell Hantz, there could be no more polarizing figure in the history of Survivor than Russell Hantz. And I understand why people don't like him. I know that it's absolute long shot for them ever to cast him now. Again, in the kind of politically correct landscape that we are in, Russell is about as far from politically correct as you could be. He has routinely insulted the show during the 40s and the host Jeff Probst. So he has not ingratiated himself to CBS or Jeff or anybody affiliated with Survivor whatsoever, and has probably burned every bridge that there is. But putting all that aside, because those were not factors, obviously, for me as I crafted this list, Russell Hantz is the reason that I got into the show. But even if you just watch the show in the way that it came out, obviously, just from in chronological order, which I was able to do with Reagan and kind of see the show through her eyes, Russell is one of the true and legitimate game changers that we've ever seen. Finding idols without clues. Everybody looks for idols without clues now. It's just like an accepted part of the game, but it had never been done before Russell Hantz. And then also his ability to make it to the end both times, back-to-back seasons, had only ever been done by Amanda, and he did it with so much more agency than Amanda did to such an unprecedented degree. He was absolutely 100% responsible for getting himself to the end both times in that game. The mistake that he made and the flaw in his game was he didn't have as much social equity, and he was unable to cash that in. The tragedy of Russell is I think that he actually could have won both of those seasons. He definitely could have won Samoa. I think that he could have won Heroes versus Villains as well, despite the fact that he didn't get a single vote in the end against Parvati and Sandra. And that is because he is one of the all-time worst that we've ever seen at choosing who to go to the end with. Even though he had complete control at various points in both of those games and could have brought any number of people to the end, he, in both cases, chose the worst people that he could have possibly chosen. And it was Natalie White in Survivor Samoa who was universally liked. No one had a bad word to say about Natalie, and she was a very easy person to vote for, as opposed to Russell, who had systematically, completely destroyed Galu. Even though obviously Natalie had gone right along with it, she didn't have to, strategize and figure out all the moves that had to be made to make it to the end. She just had to ride on Russell's coattails, and while he was, running around finding idols and making deals with everything under the sun, she was able to strengthen her relationships with people on the tribe, which ultimately ended in a blowout victory. Same thing again in Heroes versus Villains. Russell was like, well, there's no way I would ever vote for Sandra, so how could anyone else vote for Sandra? Not realizing Sandra had by far the most social capital with the heroes. She, felt like she should have been a hero. She had a history with people on the heroes tribe. She did not, totally obliterate the heroes tribe in the way that Russell did. And so, whenever you have someone like Candace on the table who literally betrayed the entire heroes tribe, or Danielle, who did absolutely nothing in the game and was kind of like this sniveling, whiny person that nobody really liked, that he could brought to the end. He goes with Sandra and Parvati, two of the most popular people who have ever played the game, right? So it's just like he was just really bad. That was his Achilles heel. He just couldn't figure out who to take to the end, and it cost him $1 million twice. So, but because of his status as a game changer, because of his status as an incredibly entertaining person and character, even though of course a villain, no doubt about that. And I know that Survivor is averse to villains these days. Russell would be hands down my number one pick. Overall, and also my number one pick for the men to see return for Survivor 50. Like I said, I am biased because I got into the show because of Russell, but I also think it would be very interesting to see how he would adapt to the game today that in a lot of ways he kind of helped set in motion. He almost like on a Richard Hatch level, sort of changed the way that the game is played. And so to see him kind of try to grapple with that, to where the game has gone today, in large part because of the moves that he made, the groundwork that he laid, back in 2009, I think would be fascinating to see. So Russell Hantz would be my number one pick for Survivor 50. So like I said, I'm batting very low average here. 4 out of 24 of the people that I picked on my cast are actually getting to Survivor 50. But hopefully you enjoyed, if you're a Survivor fan, kind of listening to me talk about some of these legendary characters of the past, and hearing my thought process behind who I would like to see on the show if I could just have anybody return for season 50. So thank you for listening to this episode. If you want to hear more Survivor focus list, let me know, because it's definitely something that I could replicate in future episodes if you so wish. And hopefully you'll enjoy season 50. Even though I disagree with a lot of the decisions they made in the cast, there are obviously some exciting people returning. Those are people returning who I didn't make my cut, but that hopefully will do well on the show as well and be entertaining characters. So I'll be watching alongside everybody else, and I'll probably have some other Survivor themed episodes in the future of Controlled Burns. Like I said, I'll be updating my top 100 Survivor contestants of all time at some point, hopefully in the near future, on the website. And that's probably something that I can share on the podcast as well at a later date. But for now, that is going to be where we leave it. Right into the podcast with your picks for who you'd like to see on Survivor 50 at controlledburns with an ES at gmail.com. Let me know what you think of the show. Like, review, comment, whatever you can do where you listen to the show. And hopefully, like I said, enjoy season 50 when it airs for us all to see next week. So thanks again, and until next time, keep it warm.